that's why I kind of brought up Nietzsche.
Right, knowing that we disagree.
I'm glad we disagree, because I think you have a developed sense of noblesse that for you it's instinctual. I mean, you're a genuine, caring person who really cares about the welfare of your neighbor. And I grew up half my life with, well, as long as good things happen to me, then everything's
right.
good.
Right.
And you know, you're encouraged as a black man to think that way.
Of course.
Just like anything good that happens to black people, A+
All for
America.
All for it, yeah.
And then it gets to a point where you realize you're like, God, that's self-serving. And so I had to
recalibrate. Well, some of this is sort of relatively not recent, but like in the last 20-ish years of my life, I've kind of come around from believing the idea of, it's kind of this humility. It's kind of like, it's like chop wood, carry water, right? Zen. That the way you find meaning in life isn't by looking for the transcendent, but by finding the transcendent in the humble.
I think also, I mean, for me, it's particularly that I understand make yourself useful.
Yeah.
Because, and that's, I think that's the toughest part about being me at my age right now, because I see Nietzsche and I see through him.
Yeah.
Because when I first started reading him, he's cracking me up.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is just that guy with no filter,
right?
Who won't shut up.
Yeah.
And I knew it, but at the same time, I was like, oh yeah, that's a good criticism.
No, he's he is the super smart 15-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Right? Who really does have some intellectual insights.
But I don't see it. He's not an asshole.
But you compare it, but what you compare it to is you compare it to sort of like Taleb's ideal was always like, I'm this Lebanese trader. I'm the 15th person in my family to have this trading house, right? My family's entire well-being, like in future generations, rests on this business surviving, right? And how do I look at the world in a different way?
Right.
Than if I'm some guy who hangs out in a cafe and reads books and smokes and drinks red wine and picks up chicks. And you know, there's a fundamental like world approach that's different. And I'm kind of finding myself more and more on the Taleb side of the house.
Oh yeah.
You know, but
because well, Taleb is kind of he's raising the curtain on the Wizard of Oz.
Oh yeah, very much.
And people hate him for that. And he is an asshole.
Oh, absolutely, he's an asshole.
He loves being an asshole.
He loves being, and there's a part of me that wants to meet him in person because I'm sure he's an asshole. But what I'm going to look for is that little sparkle in his eye as he does it, right? The joy that he's taking so much joy in being an asshole, as opposed to these people I know who are just inherently assholes and just can't help it.
Right.
And
I think Taleb does that, and that's why he invented Fat Tony.
Fat Tony, yeah.
Yeah. So
he and I got into a fight years ago about Fat Tony on Twitter. He told me to fuck off, that I was an idiot. And but anyway, moving on.
So I want to talk about psychology.
Okay.
Because I guess it's been about 3 years now, 2 or 3 years, and I'm wanting psychology to replace sociology. Because
shoot me in the face directly.
Because the social scientists, I think they're whack.
There's no science.
Right, exactly.
And it's one of these things where when I went off to college and I, started taking social science classes, right? And I'm looking at what they're doing methodologically, coming from like a physical sciences background. I'm like, how the fuck is this science?
Right.
Like, what are you doing?
Right. And I never understood that about political science either.
Right. No.
Except I know that they're calculating.
Yeah, they are, but that's a different thing. I mean, to me, political science is fundamentally the same thing that we're doing with targeted advertising today.
Marketing.
It's understanding population sentiment and understanding how to reach and market to populations.
Well, while we're on that, let's talk about voting ex-felons.
So you got to break the problem into two, right? This is the wannabe lawyer in me, right? I got to address this in two ways. There's a practical and a moral argument. right? So the practical argument is a large percentage of ex-felons are black who are going to vote straight Democrat without lifting an eye, and so the Democratic Party is going to die on this hill.
Okay.
Right? If they were all going to vote Republican, the Democrats would never in a million years do it, and the Republicans would embrace it.
Okay.
So instead what we have are Democrats embracing it and Republicans fighting it.
But to the principle.
Now we come to the principle part. I read an interesting essay once, and somebody's talking about capital punishment, and they said, look, if we had captured Hitler alive at the end of the war, right, why would we kill him? He's never going to do it again, right? It's not like he's going to come back like Napoleon from Elba, right? You know, the guy's going to be a shitty painter for the rest of his life, right? So you put him in a camp and let him paint and just call it a day. And he says the reason you execute Hitler is that you want to basically put a fence around human experience. And what you want to do is you want to say, right, what you want to say, if you step outside this fence, right, we'll hunt you down and we'll kill you.
Okay.
Right? I mean, we'll put your head on a fucking pike.
Yep.
Right? And so the issue is that one of the things that I worry about a lot, right, is it's clear to me that if you look back at the moralistic 50s, right, all those, preachers, the preachers had girlfriends and were, raping kids and these people weren't actually moral.
Right.
Right? But they were moralizing and moralistic. But but what we're doing now is we're sort of valorizing, I'm going to call it degeneracy.
Yes, we are.
Right? And it's one of these things where, Rick James is some kind of strange role model for people. Right?
Bitch.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And it's one of these things where we're all like, yeah, whatever. So, so he fucked the girl and burned her with his lighter. Come on, who hasn't had a Saturday night like that?
Right.
And it's sort of like, I'm not happy with that.
So number one, I'm one of those people that just says there's some people that need to go under the jail, and if they get raped and stabbed in prison, fine. And I always kind of like the prisoner island concept.
Model.
Just send them out there and let them destroy themselves.
Right.
And never let them off.
Right.
And so I don't like exile unless you actually control the island.
Right.
You don't stick them on a small town in Alaska.
Right.
So, number one, the first thing that strikes me about voting prison is that you'll get a Harris poll and they'll try to figure out what prisoners want. And what does the prison vote want?
Yeah.
The felon vote, right? The rapist
it's
vote, the murderers vote.
Yeah, it's like a legitimate interest block,
right.
Isn't it?
And that is just so insane. I kind of would want to see it, like Trump as president.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, I understand the sentiment. It's that low sentiment of raising the degenerate, and that is going to be, practically speaking, what makes the 1% more 1%.
Sure.
Because when you know how life works, and you see people are just being perverse, you're just like, keep me away from these idiots.
No,
and let them starve.
Yeah, but the thing is, A, they're not going to starve, and we won't let them starve, right? And B, so I'm torn on the death penalty, right? I mean, my argument has been that it should be, rare, right, certain, and quick, right? In that there's certain crimes and certain criminals for whom there's no reasonable argument of innocence, and the crime isn't, I stuck up a 7-Eleven and I shot the shopkeeper, right? I mean, it's a crime that goes morally beyond that, right? I have a problem on the flip side with, well, I robbed a 7-Eleven and I shot the shopkeeper. I got out in 3.5 years. I got out in 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I'm a little. I need a little more than that.
Would you take a brand on the forehead?
I don't know. No, because then what we're doing is we're simply saying, the problem is always, how do you get out of that life? And this is the issue. This is the one argument that people in favor of restoring voting rights have, which is, how do I reattach people to mainstream society? How do I bring them back?
I don't think you can.
Well,
I don't know.
so I'm going to make a funny point here, right? Which is, you're not a typical black guy in America,
Yeah.
right? But I will tell you that if I poll my black friends, right? If I poll my black friends, other than the set who are super left, activist political left,
Mm-hmm.
kind of that crowd, they're very much fuck these guys, right? They're much harder on crime than my white liberal friends are.
I know. I've heard that.
And it's an interesting sort of perplexing question, right?
Well, the reason is because we've lived with it.
Because you live with it,
We,
right?
we know what it's like to walk down a street and says, that is a Crip street.
That's
And
right.
I cannot
can't walk down
that
that street. My kids, and you raise your kids to go, you never walk down that street.
Yeah.
No, I get it. And I think, but I think, so let's go back and forth for a minute. I'm against it now because it's such a naked political play, right? And what part of me wants to do is, part of me wants us to sort of step back and take a breath and figure out sort of this whole voting population thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do we build a database that's reasonably accurate, right, of who gets to vote?
Yeah.
How do we, take people on and off that database? How do we make that database something that can be challenged so that if there's a mistake, it can easily be fixed? How do we make it hard to hack, right? So that I can't hack one central database and sort of evaporate half the voters in America.
Those are actually fairly simple questions. The difficult question is, how do you swap out a bureaucracy?
Yeah.
That is, and then are these things that you actually think you want to abstract actually abstractable?
And so, as an example, I've always argued, I don't believe that a material number of votes are fraudulently cast at polling places.
Yeah.
Right? It's too hard.
Right.
There's too much work, there's too many people involved, the conspiracy's too big, it would leak out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I just don't believe it.
Yeah, but I think it's completely reasonable to get 90% of the vote right.
Right.
And that's good enough.
But my argument is, I'm good with the idea of requiring ID.
Sure.
Right? If for no other reason that it makes people comfortable that isn't going on. And as a bonus extra, right, the idea that there are people who live in America who haven't been able to get ID, which means they can't go to banks, they can't fly, they can't take trains, they can't do all this other shit in life, horrifies me. So we should find a way to lower the bar so that granny who lives in rural Texas someplace and can't get into town and doesn't have a birth certificate can still find a way to get an ID.
I think if you really wanted to vote, you'd do it. Really. And,
Yeah.
and if you're a granny, you voted 40 times.
But here's the sticking question, right? And this is the hard question that people go around and around and around on, which is, on one hand, if we only let the people who really want to vote, we'll probably get a higher quality voter.
Yeah.
Okay. On the other hand, we'll exclude a bunch of people, right, whose ideas and desires won't be taken into account and probably should.
Yeah, that makes sense if you're talking about 70-80% voter turnout, but you're not.
I'm at 30% voter turnout.
Yeah, so it's like people don't care that much to vote anyway.
I know.
So,
I know. So I also, by the way, would ban vote harvesting and ban vote by mail unless you have a medical condition that precluded you from going to a polling place.
I think if you let the credit card companies do it, it would be good.
Explain.
Credit card companies, so you're on the lam. You
Uh-huh.
just held up that 7-Eleven. If you spend money on a credit card, the cops are going to find you.
Yeah.
Okay? Because the credit card companies know who you are.
Yeah, but here's the problem with I actually, interestingly, wound up with some domain knowledge here.
Okay.
Because one of my really good friends was a politician who became California Secretary of State.
Okay.
And part of the way she became Secretary of State, and I'll take a smeckle of credit for it, is that I started sending her all these crazy IT articles I was getting about how bad voting machines were.
Okay.
And how insecure the chain of security across voting technology was.
Right.
And she ran on that and won, and she basically put a stick in it in California.
Okay.
And we spent a lot of time talking about the problem of voting. And the problem of voting in America is hard because we have two requirements. The vote's secret and it's anonymous.
Okay.
I can't attribute your vote to you,
Okay.
right? On a credit card, I can attribute every charge, and there's a counterparty, right?
Mhm.
I look at my credit card bill every month and I go, what the fuck? Who bought $10,000 here?
Right.
Right? You know, that's why my ATM is secure, because the
Right.
bank and I are counterparties, and so we each have an interest in making sure there's no fraudulent use.
Well, I can tell you that problem is solved.
How?
The problem is solved by making a legitimate third key. So you make a third key that's authorized for a particular point
Yeah?
of time, and you're good. Anybody with two FA does that.
Yeah, I know, but the problem is, what part of the American voting population is competent to use 2FA?
It's actually simple. And
But
again,
then what you're talking about, I'm going to give everyone a national ID,
Yep.
and the national ID is going to have what amounts to a token, like a Cisco token on it.
Yep.
Okay, that's not bad. I'm good with that.
It's
Now the right wing's going to lose their fucking mind because we all now have the mark of Cain or whatever on us, right? And so the devil's coming.
yeah, well,
Conversely, the left wing's going to lose their mind because what we're now going to do is we're going to be able to really distinguish, you know, Tia Rosa, who didn't come here legally, can't get one of these ideas, and now she can't function in society anymore.
and the hackers are going to make it happen, and Apple's going to make it happen.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And-
I get it. So
and everybody else is going to be.
let's go back to this point of felons voting.
Okay.
Right. My immediate answer is no, because I think it's gamesmanship on the part of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And I just like, fuck you guys, I don't buy this game.
My answer is no, because you violate the social contract, and there's a certain level, and let's call that level felony, where you revoke your own right.
So can I ever unfelonize myself? Can I ever become a non-felon?
Yeah, we send you to the front line. If you survive and get back, you've been willing to shed blood for your country, and you're good.
I don't know.
But we have to always be at war with Eurasia.
With Eurasia, we always were. So I have an interesting thought on that, right? So I know a guy who's a felon. He and I, he was my lawyer once a long time ago, and he embezzled, I believe it's on the order of $70 million from the federal government.
Don't go big or go home.
And he got sent away for a really long fucking time, and I'm guessing that he's out about now, right? And I have moments where I wonder, like, what's his life like now? Like, what is he doing? Like, how do you rebuild your life after something like that?
How much did he keep?
Fair question. I'm guessing by the time they were done with him, not much. Right? I don't think he's got a couple million. And he doesn't strike me as the criminal mastermind type who would have, a crate of gold bars buried somewhere outside of Barstow.
Yeah.
Which is what I would have done.
For sure.
So the question becomes like, well, how does that guy ever re-enter society?
Well, I mean, society is not politics, and there's that old myth about the 3%ers. There's only 3% of people in the colonies who fought the American Revolution.
True, yeah.
And you just need people who are that motivated.
All right. So
that.
So I think we're kind of roughly aligned, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
Right?
I think there in this country more than any. The society is so open. The place is so big. There are so many alternatives for you to do that it just doesn't seem any reason.
So here's the go around to me
put
on
that all at risk.
Right. The go around to me on that is there are two things that are simultaneously true. Right? One of them is that the government criminalized the fuck out of everything, right? because we had this giant wave of crime and unrest going up through the 80s and 90s,
Yep.
and people were terrified as fuck.
Yep.
And so we're just gonna put them all away, right? You know, foot fault in a tennis match, prison, right? You know, I mean, and it's sort of like, you know, and so we way over incarcerated for stuff that we probably should never have over incarcerated for,
Mhm.
right? Steal $70 million from the government. I kind of get that you're going to do some time, right? I'm not, you know, but I think there are people in there who you look at the stories of and you're like, what the fuck, right? So
Well,
the flip side of it is,
yeah, I mean, judges had to co-sign all that.
I know, and the population wanted it, right? And I remember the day that the two events that in LA that sort of tripped the media were when the senator's cousin got murdered in Venice outside of my little French restaurant, right? A couple local Crips held up her and her boyfriend.
Venice was bad.
And you know, and she got shot, right? And when that girl was killed in Westwood, right, in gang crossfire, right, two gangsters saw each other and just couldn't shoot for shit and hit her and killed her.
Yep.
Right, and people just lost their minds directly.
They should have.
And so the question now the flip side is, where did all that disorder come from? There's an interesting study that talks about it being from lead. No, literally, there's a bunch of studies.
I've heard that argument.
There's a bunch of studies.
I watched the PBS special.
There's a bunch of studies, and what they show is in places that took lead out of gasoline, right, 17 years later, you saw crime start to drop. So
that's Freakonomics.
Okay, but you know, so there's also, I think, and it goes to this whole valorization of dysfunction that we've gone through in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, we did.
Right, which was sort of like, you know, you're a heroin addict and a gang member, you're awesome.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, right.
Radical chic.
And exactly, radical chic.
Yeah, and that is the kind of, I don't know, that is on the backside of growing up black in America, where as soon as Brown versus Board of Education was passed in '55, it's not 10 years until you've got hippies and an alternative lifestyle, which is being championed.
That's right.
And you know, Moynihan said, if we let all this degeneration go on, it's gonna kill a generation.
No, and
he was right.
And he was right. And so, you know, it's killed multiple generations.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what? Next question.
So let's pick up on the big-brained ape who figured out math.
Okay.
So part of the problem of being a human being is that when you act against your own interest, you don't necessarily know it. Okay? Crazy can win.
Yeah.
So we're gullible in multiple dimensions that aren't necessarily good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So you can be a political junkie, you can be a religious junkie, you can be a sports junkie, and in a society as sophisticated as this, you can go your own way. And there's plenty of room. What do we do when we find out somebody is literally just run off the rails? Like what did the guy said? This guy lived his whole life to play football.
Right.
And he blocked his wife in the face, and he was just playing football in that elevator. So how do we elevate psychology?
What do you do about the fact that people who achieve transcendence in certain disciplines can't function in the normal world?
That is a good question, because part of me is saying, well, shouldn't we just realize that that's all they are?
No, because the deal is everybody plays by the same rules. Right? The minute you start doing carve-outs, right, and we're doing it now, we're basically saying, you know, you've got poor impulse control. Like we can't imprison you for having poor impulse control, right? And that was part of where jurisprudence went off the rails, and we had a giant reaction, which was put everybody in fucking jail, right? And so there's a point where I think what we have to do is we have to kind of keep everybody playing playing by the same rules. I thought the place you were going to go with that. See, the thing I always am fascinated by is I'm fascinated by people whose entire lives are focused on a thing, because I've never been that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm like, squirrel, squirrel, squirrel.
Right.
And I've known people whose lives were like this. And what happens when like you don't make it? Right? You're the guy who wants to go to the Olympics, and your whole life has been focused on, I'm going to be an Olympian.
Right. And
you don't make the cut.
Or you make it, and you're a star for 2 years, and then...
And then what?
Right.
Right.
Like the guy who has the world record in the long jump.
Right.
Lives in San Bernardino.
Exactly. And coaches high school.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Right? So what do you do, when you can't translate that thing into sort of the magic of celebrity, which lets you stay afloat, forever and ever? But I think on Apes with Big Brains, see, the thing I believe, and this is sort of something I've come to a lot from Taleb, a lot of the shit's just random, right? There's the Cambrian Explosion,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Where sort of all this crazy shit happens,
yep.
and there's this giant leap in evolution,
mm-hmm.
but 99.98% of them died out after a generation and a half.
Right.
Because they were just like, how the fuck is this thing even alive?
So should we really worry? I mean, so I just finished a book by a guy named Walter Scheidel.
Okay.
And he says income inequality happens because society is stable enough for people to figure out the game. The only way inequality doesn't happen is when you destroy the game board, and then and it levels everything.
See, I think he's wrong. I think inequality is happening for two reasons. One is scale, that we built basically a scale-free economy. Right, I really believe this, and this is something. So go back to like the 50s.
Okay.
And we had these sort of strongly regionalized economies, and then above the regions we had nationalized economies, and then we had this very thin global economy.
Okay.
I'm a car dealer, right? I'm a really successful, I'm Cal Worthington,
mm-hmm.
right? I'm this super sick, I've got a Ford dealership, and I've got a Buick dealership down the street.
And 20 dogs named Spot.
And 20 dogs named Spot, and I'm relatively rich in my region, right?
Yeah.
My local congressman knows who I am,
yeah.
and my wife and I can fly first class to Europe, and maybe I have a ski place in Tahoe, right? That's really wealthy.
You're good.
Right? I'm rocking it for the 50s.
Yeah.
Right? Now what happens is we have these multinational global corporations,
mm-hmm.
right? So there's a power law within the region. So I have this little hexagonal tile on my game board.
Yep.
And in every discipline on there, there's a little power law.
Yep.
Right? There's 4 doctors who control most of the heart surgery, and there's 5 car dealers, and there's all these people. But there's like 300 people within the region who are kind of rich and successful.
Right.
Now I've wiped that away, and I just have a global competitive landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And what I now have is, I now have a giant ass power law, because all the good doctors work at the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic.
Right.
Right? And they might come and rotate through Cedars.
Yep.
But, if I really want to see the specialist, I'm going to fly.
Yep.
Right? And so what I have is I have people who are like up here making $50 million a year.
Yep.
Right? And they own their own jets. Right? And they have a ski house in Europe.
Yep.
And I have a staff doctor down here who's making $250 a year and living in a condo in West Hollywood.
Right.
So the power law curve, which was this tall, and there were a lot of them, is now this tall, and there's much fewer of them.
Okay, so but the doctors don't, the very rich doctors don't live any longer than the very mediocre doctors.
No.
So where does the extra money go after they're dead?
It goes into their kids.
And their kids are so sharp that they'll never lose that money.
Well, no, but the difference is that we've built. So Charles Murray, I haven't read the Bell Curve yet, and I've got to, right? Because I've got to understand why it just pissed everybody off so hard. But I read a book he called, it was called The Great Sort or something like that.
Okay.
And the premise of it is that in 1970, the top 10% of high school students in America went to like 400 colleges across America.
Okay.
In 2010, the top 10% of high school students in America went to 10 colleges.
Yep.
Right? So that leveling of the playing field that I'm talking about.
See,
I don't go to Iowa.
I think all of this is going to pass.
No, I don't think it's going to pass.
I think Brexit is an example, and I think there are things that just don't scale and maintain stability.
Well, I think that the problem is that at the same time that the scaling happened, we went through a regulatory re-engineering of the economy.
Yep.
And that deliberate regulatory re-engineering of the economy was at the average worker's expense and in favor of a thin class of corporate executives and of financial shareholders.
Yep.
And so people in finance are banked.
They're
Like
balling.
you and I fucked up not going to work for banks.
Yep.
You know, I should have stayed in banking. I really should have, right? And so at the end of the day, right, where we come to is the idea that we have this inequality both because there's been a technological change that's changed the nature of scale.
Mm-hmm.
So we have bigger power law curves,
Mm-hmm.
and because we have this regulatory re-engineering that basically said, hey, guess what? I can make the workers in Iowa fungible with workers in Hanoi, right?
Yeah.
And why the fuck would I build anything in Iowa? I'm gonna build everything in Hanoi.
Right. There's a limit to that, and it's gonna take a while for it to get through. But it seems to me that only an empire can defend empirical assets.
Well, the supply chain. What I wind up with is the supply chain that's so long and so fragile, right? That fragility becomes something that I have to build against now, and I build against the fragility by relocalizing and by onshoring and by doing other stuff.
Right. Because Trumps are inevitable.
That's right.
Nationalism is inevitable.
Yeah, and so
Human beings are always going to say, I need to be able to control my space right here.
Well, but it's not just I want to be able to control it. It's that the deal that they made with me in doing this globalization was that I would get cheap shit and I'd be able to keep my job.
Right.
Right? And if I wanted my doctor, I could keep my doctor.
Right.
And every one of those things turned out to be a lie.
Right. So you know.
And so basically people are like,
pitchforks and torches are coming.
They're coming in a big way.
Yeah.
And that's how you get Trump.
And what are I hear this week the capitalists are saying capitalism doesn't work. They're finally admitting it. Capitalism doesn't work.
Well, but the problem is we don't have capitalism. What we have is we have this sort of very close. There's a great book on.
We have regulatory capitalism.
Demosclerosis.
All right.
Right, and the idea is that we have regulatory capitalism, and the problem with regulatory capitalism is we can never stop doing anything. Right, so, and the example he uses is, let's make believe that the state of California passes a program for adult autistic children who are high functioning enough to do this, but not, right, and there's 5,000 of those kids in California, and we're going to spend $10 million on it.
You can't stop spending the money.
Can never stop spending the money.
Because everything collapses.
Well, not because everything collapses, because the people who make a living on that program and the parents in that program, the kids in that program, will die on that hill.
Right. It gets too big to fail.
And what winds up happening is, for them.
Yeah.
And what winds up happening is the rest of us looking, oh fuck it, it's $10 million. Are we going to fight over this?
Right.
And the problem is we've got 50,000 of these $10 million programs that we can never stop.
And again, this is the same thing because these are the ways that you placate the masses.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Right. And so the problem is we're stuck in this place where, it's the unholy alliance between business and government. Right? Why does Facebook want regulation of social media? Because
they can send their lawyers to tell
who's going to write the fucking who's going to write the regulation? They are.
Exactly.
Right? I want to be a regulated company.
That's the best place to be.
Absolutely. Government defends me.
You get your 2% on the massive revenue.
And more than that, it's one of these things where government defends me. Nobody can come and enter my space. I can make things, because I'm so tight with regulators, I can make things difficult for any competitor.
So ultimately, again, I think you get to the point where there's this kind of Chernobyl problem, where that program for the autistic or whatever the program is, everybody says, it's okay, we're not going to fight on this, it keeps going. And ultimately, everybody's going to get greedy, because they're all fiefs.
And that's what, and
when it gets to the brinkmanship, where it's like, what, you didn't pay me this week?
That's right.
Then that collapses.
But what happens is, at some point, the amount of money the system needs keeps going up.
Yeah.
Right.
So it all collapses.
So it all collapses. So we're gonna run into a place where local and state governments are going to go through this incredible financial hardship, and they're not going to be able to pay their bills. And then what's going to happen?
Well, I mean, there's this sovereignty law that says, California can't go broke. No state can actually go broke.
Yeah, they can't declare bankruptcy.
But I think,
But they have to balance their budget.
the thing that's going to come closer is universities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
It's
universities
already happening.
have built these massive staffs,
But it's already
and
happening.
they've done their Title IX stuff.
Private universities are basically dropping like flies.
Yeah.
And small state universities are dropping like flies right now.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's just going to have to break. It's going to have to break.
It's never fun when
and
that
the
happens.
bigger they are, the harder they
It's
fall.
never fun when that happens.
And that's the kind of thing where you have to say, what am I getting into? What are my dependencies now that I've got these choices?
Well, it's the classic argument, right? I would never today live in the city of LA.
Yeah.
Right, I'm questioning.
Unless you come with some homeowner's equity.
Right, even then, I wouldn't live in the city of LA.
Well,
Right, because the city of LA is going to go through horrible fiscal problems, which means they're going to cut services like a beast.
Yeah.
Right, they're going to have to raise taxes. So I'm going to be in a high tax, low service community.
Well, San Francisco will crash first.
The crash in San Francisco is going to be interesting. The problem I see there is the unicorns aren't really unicorns. They're not sustainable. Well, they are. The problem is it's now a real business, right? So if Facebook is a media business, which is what they are, they present me with media and they sell advertising,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why is their multiplier 15 times what Comcast's is? Right? There's a point where $1 of Facebook revenue isn't worth 15 times $1 of Comcast revenue.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the question.
Right?
And we saw that with the .com boom.
Yeah.
It just deflated.
And I think
there was a self-correction.
But I think what happens here is that the unicorns become real businesses. Right? Facebook doesn't go away.
Right.
Right? Amazon doesn't go away. But all of a sudden, I can't maintain this crazy, insane valuation curve on it. Right? And when that happens, there's a giant collapse because.
Right. And then people will start buying Ford and GM again.
That's right.
I just got out of Ford. Ford went up 20%.
Nice.
So I got out of my Ford, but I still lost money because I bought them at 10.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and people believe this Uber economy is going to work. And Uber.
Today's Wall Street Journal had a great article about Uber, and it talks about first that there's an insane level of churn in people in the gig economy,
Mm-hmm.
and the cost of that churn is buried in the books of all these companies.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part of it is they had an Uber driver who said, he lives in Minneapolis. I used to be able to make $2 a mile.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I'm now which includes my gas and my vehicle costs and everything else. That's like a real living.
Right.
Right, I'm not making 50 cents a mile. I can't live on that. And they're bailing out in this strong jobs economy. They're getting real jobs.
Well, see, I think that ultimately is what's going to happen, and then ultimately Taleb will be right.
Yeah.
And people have gone through this global risk in ways that's just not going to work. I mean, even Saudi Arabia is going to have to diversify their economy because what did it take us 10 years to frack our way to self-sustainability?
Yep.
And we should frack with CO2.
They do gas pressurization. They do what's called gas lift with nitrogen, but they could do it with CO2 just as well. And but anyway, another story.
Yep. So what's wrong with the internet as far as you're concerned? Aside from the FANG question, which
FANG question's a big question.
What are you, Elizabeth Warren?
I kind of am. I kind of think you should break up FANG.
Okay.
I think that Facebook should be 3 companies, right? And Facebook should be a company that gathers and presents media information and sells advertising, right?
Okay. That's not a new business model.
No, it's not. I think it should be a data aggregation company.
That only helps certain marketers that don't know their.
I know, but basically today Facebook does three things. It's media, data aggregation, and ad sales. That's Facebook. That's what they do. Right? So I want to break those three up, and I want to basically create competition at the media level, at the targeting level, and at the ad sales level.
That's not gonna crumble the empire.
Why not? I bet it will.
Because that's what goes on behind the scenes anyway.
Yeah, but the
you
problem
just
is,
don't know the name of those small companies.
Yeah, but I've got enough visibility into it to know that Facebook, Google, Amazon control the entire vertical chain, and they use that exploitatively against other companies that want to come and compete in the space. And that's the definition of a monopoly in my view, and they should be regulated and broken up.
Well, I also think that in order to provide the service at the scale that it does, in meeting the demand, there's not much of a way around that.
I don't like.
Because if you're GM, you have to standardize everything so the GM works.
Yeah.
All right. You have to be the guy that builds the Cadillac pieces so that you can take the whole thing apart and put it back together.
Yeah, but GM outsources all kinds of stuff.
Well, now.
They outsource.
Now. But within their first 10, 15 years of existence.
Yeah, but now the companies are mature enough that we can start talking about doing this to them. That's one.
But I don't think the alternative companies are healthy enough.
So the second, that's because they can't compete with these companies. So the second part of the problem is not enough people have been punched in the face in elementary school.
Yeah.
In today's world.
Yeah.
And people believe that they can say and do anything consequence-free. And on a real basic level, right, the whole armed society is a polite society. It's like human behavior has a bunch of regulatory aspects to it. And the thing that regulates us are groups.
Did you see Hell or High Water?
Not yet. I want to see that.
Okay, you definitely have to.
Why?
See
What
that.
happens? That.
Well, what happens when you try to rob a bank in Texas with pistols?
You get the shit shot out of you.
Exactly.
By all the customers.
Right. That's not so polite.
But you get my point, right? Is that there's this inherent regulation in that.
Yeah, I think that works. Again, my answer to a lot of these questions are the decentralization of power and the enablement of self-determination.
Yeah, I know.
So you get smaller entities that are able to do more things.
And but they can't do that. Won't happen as long as FANG aren't broken up.
But right now, I don't know that a lot of companies know how to be conglomerates. And one of the wonderful things about Amazon is it is a conglomerate.
Yeah, it's a very good conglomerate.
And you can't play the VC game with what Amazon does. You can't. And so one of the things that I think has been wrong with the American economy for a long time is that's the way they've been teaching MBAs. It's like you brand your company,
yeah,
and your company becomes a stock. And we need to know, all we need to know is your stock's performance, and you're good to go.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think.
And so we don't now know how to manage companies that have general interest. All right, the only person that's doing that now is Warren Buffett.
Yep.
And so we just have the wrong kinds of companies in the United States, and that's not something that antitrust is going to fix.
To be continued.
All right.
But I think that basically we don't have enough consequence on the internet. We don't have enough kind of, the internet net we have motivates cruelty and snarkiness. It doesn't motivate kindness.
Well, that's based on the business model. Again, this is
Right,
about
clicks.
selling
How do I
ads
get clicks?
and selling clicks, and it's ridiculous now. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody gave me this bogus question that it says Harris Poll says X, Y, and Z. And I says, well, how do you reconcile that? And I'm like, that's a clickbait article.
Yeah.
And so I went to the page where he did the reference. It was in People magazine.
Yeah.
And this was a 562-word essay. And there were 2,300 lines of code in there, including at least 40 ads.
That's right.
And the amount of effort that people go
to
to
get you to
grab
click.
your attention.
I know. I agree.
Is this ridiculous economy.
Well, and the problem is that because the marginal cost of it keeps getting driven down.
Yeah, but also because people think they can aggregate their way to wealth, and they can.
They can't.
But right now that's what VCs are.
Because they can't think of any other way to do it.
They don't. They're out of ideas.
Yeah. Well, that's the decline of quality of media in the world.
We're giving the people what they want.
Good and hard. All right.
Cheers.
Man. Cheers.
Good. I'm all talked out.
Yeah, me too. I'm tired.
Stop.
Go to a party with Grace tonight. I'm going to the party, Grace.
What am I doing tonight? I don't have